issues aside, I'll call tonight's City Council workshop to order. And Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Husnick.
Here.
Councilmember Valento.
Here.
Councilmember Erickson.
Here.
Councilmember Roberts.
Here.
And Mayor Bain.
Here. I'd like to invite everyone to rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Council, we have a planned agenda before you this evening. Just a quick note, tonight is a workshop session, so anything is a more informal working session of council. While we do have a planned agenda, anything that is discussed tonight that requires official action will come forward at a future city council meeting for a vote. So tonight is just that more informal working session. However, as part of all of our public meetings, we do have open forum planned. And it looks like we have one member signed up. Jerry, if you'd like to join us for open forum. Open forum is any interested party's opportunity to speak on any topic of your choosing. And Jerry, welcome.
Thank you. So, Madam Mayor and Council, I guess formally my name is Jerry Grutner. I am president of the Forest Lake Lake Association and also a 40-year resident of Forest Lake. I'm here tonight to talk about two things. Number one is the alum treatment, which is on the agenda. I want this group to know that the Lake Association is 100% supportive of the alum treatment. We have communicated it to our 500 members. We brought it up at the annual meeting that we had in May at the high school, and the response has been very positive from a community standpoint. I was just talking to Jessica. She has not received any questions about, the putting a chemical into the lake or whatever. So it's a very positive thing for the lake. So I just wanted council to know that the Lake Association is 100% behind the alum treatment. Now, the second part of my 3-minute conversation is in regards to the memo that was part of the agenda for the public nuisance compliance. Okay. First of all, I want to commend Amanda. I don't see her here, though, but I thought that the memo she did was an excellent memo. I think this type of enforcement is long overdue in the city of Forest Lake, and I know that there are many residents that would support it. I personally would support it, and many of my neighbors would also support this. Unfortunately, I think you probably would have more attendance from maybe potential residents if they had known more about the opportunity to talk about this. And I know it won't be the last time it'll be on the agenda, but I just found out about it Friday night when I happened to look at the agenda. So, but some comments on the memo. To me, reading it, and I realize this is still in infancy stage, but I think there needs to be clear definition between what's considered a public nuisance and then what's considered a private. And Amanda addressed that in the memo, and then when you look at Ordinance Code 96, there's discussion in there about it, so obviously there needs to be some cleanup of documents, but to me, a public nuisance is not just what you can see from the street or public view, it's also what's happening in the backyard also. So I hope that that's one of the considerations here when you start moving forward, is that public nuisance isn't just what you can see from the street, it's also what's going on in the backyard. And our ordinance right now talks about all those things that are public nuisances in the backyard. I believe that the steps that are laid out in this memo are terrific. I do think that the fine process is probably the hammer, to get people to clean up their properties. You can issue them what do you call it, the compliance letter. I don't know what that will do for some people. And then the administrative citation, again, it becomes a fact that if you're going to end up fining a property owner, I would also encourage it not to be $100 or $200. That's not going to do anything for these properties. It has to be something more significant. And even more importantly is I like the concept that if it is not resolved within the specified time, the fine or the assessment on their property taxes doubles. I mean, it will clean up these properties because it's money that they've got to be responsible for. The one concern I have is the discussion in here in this procedural about abatement, that the city has an opportunity to go onto the property to abate the property. However, if the owner says no trespassing or no, you can't come on my property, then you don't have an option. It seems like it may be an option, but I'm not sure how anybody would ever get to abatement because they're never gonna let you get on the property anyways, so. So I think that's about it. I think it's a great tool, and I would encourage the council to consider a substantial fine process so that you have some teeth in it. Otherwise, you're just gonna be sending letters back and forth to each other, so. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Is there anyone else that would like to speak in open forum this evening? All right, seeing none, move to our next agenda item, which is the Republic Services 2022 Annual Presentation. Patrick or Karen, any tee up before Bev takes over?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we have Bev here to talk about all the stuff that Republic Services has done in the past year, some really good stuff. She does have a presentation, so I'm gonna start that up for her, and then let her take it. Is it up on, it's up on the screen? Okay, yep.
Excellent. Welcome.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back. It's been a little while. We had a bit of a disruption there with the pandemic and weather. So today I'm here to talk about 2022 and let you know what we saw, what we've done, and kind of go through some of the stats with you. First of all, I wanted to start out to let you know just how many carts we have out on the streets right now with the residents. As you can see, we've got a number of trash carts out there, and some of our homes have 2 and some have 3 carts. So some larger volumes, perhaps larger families. And then for recycling, we've got just slightly less than that at 6,085. Yard waste is at $5.95. We do have some homeowners, some on the lake that have more yard waste. So I think the most I've seen so far is 6 carts at a house. So it's been a real popular subscription service for the residents. And overall, the recycling participation has been strong here at 79%. We're trying to get it to that 80. We're just about there. When I talk about participation, what I mean is this is measured by a resident who sets out once a month is considered a participant. So as long as someone's setting out once a month, they're counted in this. So really nice. Certainly kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of all of the cities that we service with municipal contracts. And so it's nice to see that continue to be strong. Moving on, I wanted to talk about the recycling tons. We love recycling, and the goal is to recycle more and reduce our overall municipal waste. In 2022, you see that we had over 1,400 tons recycled. 2021, we saw that increase. Now in 2022, we did see that decrease a bit. And the reason is people have returned back to work. We do have some people still doing hybrid, some people still working from home. A lot of the students that were home are back in school. So this is what we've seen consistently across the metro. So just wanted to point out the reason why it's gone down. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Moving on is the quality of the recycling. How well are the residents recycling? We've seen in previous years a lot of wish cycling across the metro. Here in Forest Lake, in 2021, we saw 18%. Kind of our top guideline is to stay under 15%. And so we had some work to do. We had some more public education that we needed to do. And then in '22, that dropped down to 10%. So what the city's doing here, along with Republic Services, and educating residents and giving them the tools that they need to be successful recyclers is working. One thing I wanted to point out here that is interesting is when you look at the overall mix of recyclable material, you'll see that the OCC, which is your cardboard, is for certainly the highest percentage in the mix. We also have a fair amount of mixed paper as well. So I think this is kind of fun to see just what are people putting in their carts. And again, that 10% on 2022 is in my top 3 of all the cities that I manage contracts. When we started out back in August of 2019, it was a bit of a whirlwind. We had 18 days to get started here, deliver carts, and start servicing. We took a lot of the customer service calls ourselves, and staff here also. It just took a large number of requests from the residents, and I'm happy to say we were able to calm things down real quickly, and it's been very consistent for years now. And here are just a few things that customers are saying. We do these surveys after a customer has called into our call center. We'll make outbound calls out. This is a third party to find out what their experience is. If someone calls in and they give us if they get a neutral score, which would be out of a 1 of 10, it would be an 8. Or if they get under an 8, we make personal calls to those residents to find out what can we do better, what happened, and if there's anything internally we need to do. If there is a glitch of any type, we get that fixed right away. It's real fun to talk to the residents and get their feedback. And like I said, here are just some examples. What I wanted to note is this last winter was difficult. We had some very challenging weather, a lot of snow, a lot of ice. And I actually talked to a few of the residents who had done the surveys, and one here said, "We had a rough winter in Forest Lake. Only once was service delayed. I commend your crews for their perseverance, even with the difficult period of bad weather." I will say the majority of the difficult stops we had involved private roads, those that aren't necessarily maintained by city maintenance, public works. They were out there doing a great job, and we partnered with them to make sure that we got out as quickly as possible in safe conditions. Recycling education. Forest Lake has a recycling education grant, and the city staff and residents are really engaged in recycling. So what we do here at Republic Services is we work with staff and create some social media posts for you, also our education calendar, and any other resources to take some of that load off of city staff. It's very positive for us, and it's definitely working. We saw that in the contamination decrease here year over year. 2023 planning, here we are. And so we've met with Karen and had some discussions on what we want to accomplish in 2023. Granted, at the time I put this slide together and presented it to her, we were talking, hey, yard waste is just around the season. We are definitely in yard waste season now, especially after spring cleanup. And we will be conducting another audit, another sort on the recycling to see where we're at for the contamination rate and see what the material mix looks like to see if there are any changes. With that, what we can do is adjust education. We've had discussions about event services and portables, and continue education. We'll have at least 4 really nice pieces put together here for the city for public education, and certainly we can do more if need be. Private road resolutions and planning, I mentioned with weather, some of the private roads are very challenging, whether it be ice or significant amount of rain. We've not had a lot of rain, so therefore we've had less issues on one particular road. But we will continue to work with staff, continue to work with the residents there. That one is a little bit challenging. Resident communication, updated phone numbers. We have a call-em-all system, so if you have your phone number on file with us, when there is a weather event, what we do is we put out a communication to the resident. They get a call saying your service will be delayed, trucks are running 2 hours late, or service will be started, we're going to pick up tomorrow instead of today, we've had to pull the trucks off. So it's a way that we can communicate with the residents. And it works really well, and residents speak favorably about that service. The more phone numbers and accurate phone numbers we can get, the better that communication will be. And then winter 2023 preparation. This is when we start talking about educating the residents in the fall for winter set-outs, how to set out properly. And we work with Public Works on that because we don't want them placing where the plows are coming through. And some of those things. So this overall is what we're looking at in 2023, what we've discussed, and we'll continue to have more and more discussion as needs arise. The other thing that I wanted to tell you is I've been involved in some conversations recently with the MPCA. They've released their Metropolitan Solid Waste Management Plan. So the draft is out there. I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to look at that. It's very interesting. I'm a bit of a data hound, so I really, really enjoyed it. I wanted to point out a couple things. This city in particular, along with just a few, are really beyond where the MPC wants to see cities go. They're saying that they want to see more organized collection, which is really neat to see because you're already there. They're finding that volumes are better. Right now, here's just a couple of stats for you. 60% of the communities in the Twin Cities metro area offer organized recycling collection. But when it comes to trash, we're at about 37% overall, and the nation is about 70%. So you've had organized collection for a number of years. And so congratulations to all of you for, really paving the way for some of the other cities, really setting that example. And so with that, looking ahead, 2024, you're probably wondering, when will the new rates be out? As soon as the county sets their disposal rate, I'll have those for you. I expect that to be probably September. Maybe we'll be fortunate to see those a little sooner. But as soon as that comes through, I'll be able to share that because we do adjust rates based on that disposal. We saw a significant increase in disposal last year. We're not sure where it's going to be this year. And then, of course, it's time to start talking about what does the next contract look like. This contract will term the end of 2024. It's a time for us to take a look at what's worked really well, what do we want to see change, and really have some good, strong conversations around that. So I wanted to bring that to your attention as well. If you have any questions, I'm certainly open to answering any, and if I don't have the answer, I will tell you that and get it for you.
Very good. Thank you, Bev. What questions do we have for Bev? We have our first discussion of trash with new council, and certainly thank you for the reminder of kind of contract terms. Questions we have either on 2022 look back, planned activities for 2023, or things going forward? Anything at this time?
Not really.
Well, Well, good enough then. I appreciate your time this evening. If anything comes to mind, please pass that on to Karen, and I can get you whatever you need.
Very good.
And hope to see you again soon.
Thank you for the update.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. All right. Our next topic this evening, as Jerry had mentioned in his open forum comments, the Fall Alum Treatment Project. And a moment just to change slides here.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for being
Madam
here.
Mayor, Council, thanks for having me this evening. My name is Jessica Lindemeyer. I'm with the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District. I've been with the district for about 7 years now, but I actually grew up in the area, so I spent my time here in Forest Lake pretty much my whole life and swimming in Forest Lake. So I'm really excited to be talking to you about this project this evening. Before we get started, for those of you who may not have had a chance to interact with the Watershed District directly before, we are a special purpose unit of local government located here in Forest Lake. Our office is in the same building as Kodiak Coffee, and we are tasked with maintaining and improving water quality in northern Washington County and southern Chisago County. And before we dive even further, I just wanted to touch very briefly on Forest Lake water quality as it stands right now. So these numbers are based on the 10-year average. So you can see that we do grade each basin of Forest Lake separately. So while Forest Lake is one lake, it does somewhat act like 3 separate lakes, the way that the basins are connected. So we do rank them individually. You'll see that the East Basin has the best water quality at a B+, and the West Basin has the lowest at a C+. However, as a whole, Forest Lake averages right around a B. And these are the same grades like you would get in school. A is very great, F is failing. So having a B average for Forest Lake, that's very good. Forest Lake is by no means in bad shape. However, it can be in even better shape. So one of the things you'll hear a lot in this presentation tonight, as well as in many other materials you'll get from the Watershed District over time, is reference to phosphorus. So phosphorus is a naturally occurring nutrient that occurs in our environment. Plants need it to grow, humans need it to thrive. However, when we have it in excess in our waterways, that's when we get large algae blooms, frequent algae blooms, water quality can get really poor, visibility gets really shallow, and overall the lake water quality suffers. So when the Watershed District is doing projects such as the alum treatment, most of the time we're specifically targeting phosphorus and reducing those nutrient inputs into the lake. So how do we do that? So the Watershed District, we implement projects like the alum treatment, Bigsby Park, if you've heard of that. We did a project on Shields Lake, a variety of these big in-ground projects. But we also do programs as well. So we work with the city's regulatory department to enforce erosion control on construction sites and things like that to keep runoff from entering our lakes and keep sediment where it needs to be. And we also try very hard to instill behavior change in our residents so that residents know that what they're doing isn't negatively impacting their waterways. You know, there's a lot of practices that we have maybe had over time that we just naturally think is normal and doesn't have any harm, but in reality can be quite detrimental to our lake. A great example of that is taking our fall leaves in the winter and either, dumping them into a ditch or into a wetland. A lot of people, our natural instinct to say is, well, these are leaves, they're natural, that wetland's natural, they will naturally decompose. But in reality, that very quickly ages a wetland and can contribute phosphorus to our lakes. So we also put a lot of emphasis on behavior change and education as well. So when we think about the projects that have been done in Forest Lake, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are all of the ones that impact Forest Lake, the lake itself, directly. There are a lot of other projects we've done in the city of Forest Lake, that maybe don't have direct impacts on Forest Lake, but on other lakes downstream. So these ones listed here are just a selection of those that we've done. Like I mentioned, we did one on Shields Lake, and then of course I have mentioned here the Enhanced Street Sweeping Program that the Watershed District partnered with the city on, that won the League of Minnesota Cities City of Excellence Award. So that was a really great project. And all of those projects have led up to the alum treatment. So without these projects here, we wouldn't be able to do the alum treatment. And I'll touch on that here shortly. So all of those projects that I just showed, street sweeping, Bigsby Park, Shields Lake, all of those are all addressing what's called external loading. So what we have to do is we have to systematically go around the lake and reduce the amount of phosphorus coming into the lake and to stop the external load. And then what the alum treatment does is come in next, and that addresses what has built up in the lake over time. And you can't address what's built up in the lake first because things from outside will keep coming in and it will immediately negate any project that you just did. So the Watershed District had to go around first and address all the external load, and now that we've done that, we can go in with the alum treatment and address the internal load. So with that, the Forest Lake alum treatment is very much a capstone project or a milestone. Like I said, we would not be able to do it without all of those other projects that have already been done. It is anticipated to reduce phosphorus loading in Forest Lake by 527 pounds. And I know you're probably thinking that number means very little to me, but 1 pound of phosphorus can support the growth of 500 pounds of algae. So if you think for every 1 pound of phosphorus is potentially 500 pounds of algae, 500 pounds of phosphorus reduction is very, very high. So that's a really great project that will impact Forest Lake significantly. And so that will result in cleaner and clearer water, fewer algae blooms, and less intense algae blooms, and as well increased property values for lakeshore residents. But what is alum? So I keep mentioning an alum treatment, but what is alum in general? So alum is the same thing that you'll find in your kitchen pantry. It's what's been used for pickling foods for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's been used to drink drinking water for hundreds of years, and it's used in lakes to address phosphorus loading. So here's a picture of what it looks like. So alum is applied to the lake in liquid form. So these are specialized barges that bring the alum with them onto the lake, and then the tubes drag in the water behind the barge and inject the alum into the water. And as the alum enters the water, it immediately starts reacting with the phosphorus. So what the alum does as it falls into the water, it binds to the phosphorus, making it no longer available for algae growth. And then it sinks to the bottom and creates sort of a flocculent layer along the bottom of the lake and traps any more phosphorus from coming up underneath from the sediment. So it's kind of twofold. It's grabbing from the water as it's going down, and then it's trapping in the sediments when it lands in the bottom. And that alum treatment, depending on disturbances and inputs, can last anywhere from 10 to 15 years. So it is a fairly long-term project, and the district will be doing regular monitoring on the lake to see how the alum treatment is faring over time. So we'll be able to tell with our annual monitoring, is the alum treatment staying like we expected it to? Is it doing better? Is it doing worse? And so we'll be able to track how efficient the alum treatment is doing. So the first application will be this fall, and then we'll be monitoring next year to see how it went. And then there may be a second application in 2025. It's very common for alum treatments to be split over 2 years to increase their longevity, but depending on what we see next year, it may not be necessary, but we are expecting to do a second treatment. So here's just kind of a visual of what that looks like. If you imagine the barge moving from it would be the right side over to the left side. All of these yellow dots are representing phosphorus. The white dots are the alum, and so as the barge travels across the lake, it's binding to that phosphorus and sinking to the bottom. When we look at some of the logistics, like I said, this will happen in mid-September, and it will also happen midweek. So we really want to try to reduce the amount of disturbances to recreational users as we can. So we've worked with the DNR for that. So mid-September, in the middle of the week, there are no recreation restrictions. We've worked with Jerry and the Lake Association to kind of start getting the word out. You know, we're not asking you to not boat, but if you could give the barge some space, that would be great. It is all run on GPS, so the barge is automated. It is manned. There is an individual there controlling it, but if we can keep on the GPS track without having to avoid other boaters, that will be the most efficient way to do it. It's applied by professional applicators with a specialized barge, and we'll be accessing the lake from the third lake launch, so Hagberg. And that is where the DNR suggested we do this treatment from, even though the application itself will only be occurring on the middle basin. So we'll be launching the barge from third lake, but the application itself will only be happening on second basin. And here's a picture of where the application will be occurring. So it's only occurring, again, on the middle basin and only in areas where the depth is greater than 15 feet. So we're not gonna be up on people's shorelines, interfering with their docks, anything like that. It's all out right in the middle of the lake. And despite it occurring just in the middle basin, the full lake will see benefits. So if you were out there the day of the application, right next to the barge, you would see an immediate change. It will look like a clear trail of water right behind that barge. So the middle basin will see pretty much immediate changes. The other two basins will be a little more weather dependent. So if there's really good mixing between the three basins at the time, or we've got a lot of wind, the other basins will probably see changes in the next couple days. If it's really still, there's not a lot of mixing, it may be a couple weeks. It's all weather dependent. And that's the same thing with the timing of the application as well. We say September because it is all completely weather dependent. There's no way for us to pick a specific date and say the applicators will be out there. Oh, so here's, like I was saying, immediate changes. So these pictures here are from Moody Lake. So the Watershed District has done alum treatments on Moody Lake and on Shields Lake. And as you can see here, the top photo is from before the alum treatment, and the second photo is from the next day from the alum treatment. So you can see how quickly the algae was cleared out of Moody Lake. We likely won't see as drastic of pictures like this for Forest Lake, because Forest Lake, like I said, is already at a B. So Forest Lake is already a pretty healthy lake. Big drastic changes like this are more common if you're starting at a C, a D, or an F, you know, something really drastic. But it is possible that some areas of the lake will see this drastic of a visual change overnight. And then looking in the long term, so kind of 1 year and further out, like I said, we're gonna have less algae blooms, less intense algae blooms. We'll have clearer water, but we're also gonna have some more vegetation. So aquatic plants grow by getting sunlight down to them. So as the lake becomes clearer, sunlight can penetrate deeper into the lake. So we are expecting more aquatic plants. Of course, those are a completely natural part of a healthy lake ecosystem, but we also know that they are a recreational nuisance in some cases. And so the good news for Forest Lake is that while we expect to see some plant growth, we're not expecting it to be a significant amount, and it should balance itself back out over time. So it's not gonna keep increasing and increasing and increasing over time. It will find its balance and come back to a baseline. But again, we're not expecting it to be a huge, drastic increase in aquatic plants, but we will see some. And lastly, here's my summary for you. So again, over 500 pounds of phosphorus reduction, which 1 pound of phosphorus can grow up to 500 pounds of algae, so that'll be a big change for Forest Lake. Alum is a safe, non-toxic compound. We'll have absolutely no recreation restrictions on the lake, and changes will be almost immediate. So with that, I'll just leave it up. The district will be hosting 3 info sessions for the general public, 2 here in June, another in July. I'll likely be doing more in August, and then again right before the treatment in September. I don't have those dates yet, though. But with that, that's what I have for you. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Council, questions for Jessica this evening?
Will it affect the weed harvesting at all?
Yes and no. So if we have increased plant growth, obviously the weed harvester may have more work to do. The watershed district typically isn't directly involved in that. One of the biggest concerns for the weed harvester is not being able to go into areas of invasive aquatic plants. And this alum treatment won't specifically encourage invasives over natives. So it's really hard to say what the impact might be on the plant harvester.
And then is the compound that's used, is it just alum or is it a compound of other things that?
I believe it's aluminum sulfate.
Okay.
So the classic
it.
aluminum and our alum, and then with it is a buffer solution to make sure that the pH in the lake stays the same so that we don't have any fish die-offs or things like that.
Good.
Oh, and maybe it was in the packet, I missed it. What's the cost of this project and who's the funding?
Yeah, good question. I prepared an extra slide just for that. So we did get a Clean Water Fund grant for that. So the total for the project is $667,000, and well over half of that is from the Clean Water Fund program. And then the district grant match, which comes from our tax levy, is $133,000.
This has been done on Moody Lake. Are there other recreational lakes of scale that have had similar treatments? Can you, and maybe it wasn't done, maybe it was done by another jurisdiction. Can you just speak to
Yeah.
some of that experience and success?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, so like you mentioned, so we have done Moody and Shields here in Forest Lake. And then comparable ones, so the Rice Creek Watershed District, which also shares the city of Forest Lake, they were involved in the White Bear Lake alum treatment. And then several of the metro lakes have had alum treatments as well. One of the biggest questions we get for anybody who's familiar with the White Bear Lake alum treatment is their plant growth was incredibly high. They saw a huge, or I'm sorry, White Bear Lake. I believe I meant Bald Eagle Lake. Sorry about that. Bald Eagle Lake, their aquatic plant growth was incredibly high. But that lake, again, wasn't going from a B to an A. I believe they were going from a C- up to an A. So the level in clarity change was much more drastic. So the lengths that plants could go to regrow was much more significant than what we expect to see on Forest Lake.
Do you think this moves us from a B to an A?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, we'll be to 93% of the way of the district's long-term goal, which is a 2040 goal. So we will be significantly ahead of schedule by conducting this alum treatment at this time. Yeah.
Other questions, feedback? Questions from the public addressed to you? I know there's also opportunities for some info sessions, so thank you for doing those.
Yeah. Yep.
Very good.
Perfect.
Thank
Thank
for being
you.
here. All right, next item on our agenda this evening is the administrative code enforcement abatement, and I think this is gonna maybe a tag team between Patrick and Amanda? Or maybe just Amanda?
Aaron, do you want me to use my computer
It's
or
up to you.
USB?
Whatever you want. If you already have it on your laptop.
I do.
Yeah.
Is there any easiest I can come over here? I can go over there too. It's whatever you want.
Do you need an adapter?
Yeah. Do you have a USB, like a general USB?
I don't know if that's the same, or if that will work. Do you have?
That one won't work. I can just plug in my thing up there. It's not a big deal, really. Would you rather that I just pop this in and use what's on it? Yeah, that's just. I can easily put this guy in.
Yeah, flip it over.
This way.
Nope, that way, yep. Nope, this way.
I'll get out of your way. How about?
Thank you. Which one is
It's the code enforcement.
Okay. This-
That's the guy.
I'm gonna plop it over here too, just so that I have it
Sure.
for
Oh, yeah, for you.
public record after. And this is, we don't need this anymore. Is that your, is that the cap for it?
Yeah.
Okay, and then all you should need to do is this, and then all you'll have to do is just click there.
Okay.
Once I get it up on the screen, this is the only side that'll show. This is your next slide.
Oh, nice, thank you. Good evening, Your Honor, Counsel. Tonight, we're going to talk about public nuisances and your options for code enforcement. You did get a memo in your packet that discusses this, but we'll kind of go through it actually in some length. Hopefully, this can be a little bit more of a dialogue than just a monologue. So if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to interrupt me. And then at the end, I do have some more specific questions that the staff needs direction from you on as well. Okay, so the agenda is we're going to talk about what are public nuisances, then we're going to talk about the tools that you have to manage these things, the limitations and the realities of costs that come along with our toolbox, and then looking for some guidance from you. A public nuisance is a condition which unreasonably annoys, injures, or endangers the safety, health, morals, comfort, or repose of any considerable number of members of the public. It's a statutory definition. In addition to that, a public nuisance is anything that our code says is a public nuisance. This is some examples of what public nuisances look like, from overgrown weeds to poorly maintained building to junk in the yard to a bunch of more junk in the yard. So examples of ordinances that would be from other cities, just sort of words that they've put into their code to try to encapsulate what a public nuisance is. So this would be an ordinance that's talking about essentially junk or garbage or that kind of thing in a yard. This would be unsheltered storage. So this is a sample definition that a city would use to describe all of the items that would be unsheltered storage, which is somewhat different than junk. So junk is something that we would throw away. Unsheltered storage is something that is not garbage. It has value, but it's still contributing to like a clutter situation. Property maintenance, so this is going to be talking about the exterior of a building if you fail to maintain a structure so that it attracts nuisance activity, or it's unsightly, or it contributes to adverse property values. These are sort of in here by way of just examples of what other cities have used in their codes to get at various public nuisances. And then typically, cities will include an ordinance talking about nuisances that are related to business. So this would be if you're doing some really significant car work in your yard where you're like draining the oil into the sewer, or something of that nature. Oftentimes cities will also talk about animals, noise, occasionally odors, snow, failing to remove snow, things like that. Okay, so generally speaking, those are the things that are a public nuisance. And it's important to know that as we're talking about, as we go through our code enforcement tools, what we're really talking about are public nuisance enforcement tools. So what we can do to prevent or stop public nuisances, not any code violation. So the tools that we have at our disposal are compliance letters, administrative citations, abatement, that's where we would go in and actually clean up the thing. A civil action, there's two different types. We'll talk about those, an injunction or an abatement civil action, a hazardous building or property civil action, and then criminal citation. Compliance letters. We generally want to start here. This is going to be the first notice that we would give to a property owner. Hey, you're not allowed to have junk in your yard. That's a violation of code section 36.2. You have until, 30 days or whatever the appropriate timeline would be to remove said items. And then if you fail to do so, we may take further action against you, including but not limited to administrative citations or abating or, whatever our tools are that we want to list. So this is the first notice that the property owner would get that they're in violation of our code. There's no, fines or anything that would be assessed at this point. At this juncture in other cities, you get some compliance, but there are some people who compliance letter is not going to be enough motivation to get them to clean the junk out of their yard. So then we move to, Then we move to administrative citations. This is an option for nuisances that we can't abate, which we'll talk about what that means in a second. Repeat offenders, so you've got your people who just kind of keep doing the same thing over and over again, aren't really respecting the compliance letters, that kind of thing. An administrative citation does not include the criminal process. So generally, there's criminal citations that police officers can write, and then there's these administrative citations that can be issued by city staff. They're not issued by a police officer. Preferably, they would be issued by code enforcement officer. Currently, the city does not have a code enforcement officer. We will be talking about the benefits of a code enforcement officer shortly in this presentation, but that would be a person whose job it is to, when we get a complaint, go out there, inspect the property, confirm that there is in fact a violation, send the compliance letter, track the compliance letter timeline. If, at the end of the 30 days or whatever it might be, go back out there, re-inspect. Okay, they haven't picked up all of the junk. Now we're going to send the administrative citation. So it's the person who's doing all of those steps. In cities of this size, in other cities that I work in, most do have a full-time code compliance officer. It's honestly not a fun job for a lot of people. You have to be a unique person to like it, but it's definitely a lot of work to do all of the things. The other nice thing about administrative citations is it provides financial incentive for the property owner to pick up their stuff because they don't want the $200 fine or whatever. And then the other thing about administrative citations is if they don't pay them, we are able to assess them to the property. So from the city's perspective, we know we're going to get paid. The other difference between an administrative citation and a criminal citation is we get the $200. In the criminal citation, it goes through the state government and we get a chunk of it, but it's not, we don't get the full. So to move to adding administrative citations to our code, because right now we don't really have a workable process in the code, the first step would be to adopt an ordinance. The ordinance needs to clearly state the authority for administrative citations, specifically some of the statutes that give the city authority. We also need to state what we would include on our citation, describe how we're going to serve it. So if we're serving by mail, if we need to serve in person, generally most people serve by mail or in person, they allow both. Determine a time frame for the payment, the appeal period, and then create a clear appeal procedure. It's important that this administrative citation is appealable by whomever we would be issuing it to, and that process is clearly articulated and they understand the timelines for when they need to appeal and what that would look like. The second step would be that we need to adopt essentially a fee schedule. So we would be looking through our code for the various items that we would consider public nuisances. If they aren't currently identified as a public nuisance, we would need to do so in our code. But then also we would be creating a list of, okay, if it's, let's say, weeds over whatever it would be, 16 inches or whatever the measure that we're using is going to be, and you're in violation of that, that's a public nuisance, and the fee is $100 or whatever we want that fee to be. So each thing would be assigned its administrative citation fee, and then we would establish whatever we would want for the increased fine amount for repeat offenders. Again, typically most cities double, so if it's $100 this time and you do it again within the next 12 months, it's going to be $200, and then $400 and $800 and so on, up to a maximum of $2,000.
Say that last part again, up to a maximum of what?
$2,000, and that's a statutory requirement. Step 3, we need a code enforcement officer. This is a big job. So you know, we would need somebody who would be identified as the person who's overseeing issuing these citations, and making sure that, you know, that we're monitoring all of that. We would also need to work with the finance department to create a process for tracking the fines and making sure those are getting paid in. We need to create the forms. I do have forms that we can use, and then we need to conduct some training for staff. Specifically, the training that I would be looking to do with staff is around due process rights for those who would be receiving these administrative citations, limitations to inspections, you know, limitations to going on people's property, some of those kinds of things that we would want staff to be trained in. So the contents of the administrative citation would include the property address, the code section they violate, the amount of the penalty, you know, notifying them that if they fail to correct, they'll get another one of these, the process for filing an appeal, and then a notification that if they don't pay this, we have the right to assess it to their property taxes. The appeal process, I want to talk about this for just a second. This appeal process applies to both administrative citations, which would be a new tool that we're proposing tonight, and abatement, which is a tool that you currently have, but we're not really using. And so what you see up here is for citation, but instead of citation issued, you could also just say abatement proposed. It's the same concept. So at the point when we issue a citation, if it's paid and the violation is corrected, we're done, right? If it's paid but the violation is not corrected, we would issue a second administrative citation, potentially depending upon what the thing is. If it's a junk or something that we could abate, perhaps we move to abatement options. Potentially we could move to a criminal citation, depending upon what it is, or civil action. So that will really be incident specific. You know, it's just depending upon what type of situation we're dealing with. If they appeal, so let's say that we issue an administrative citation and likely there'll be something in there, but you have 10 days to appeal or whatever, some time frame to appeal, and they appeal. The appeal would go before an ALJ, an administrative law judge, and the administrative law judge will listen to both sides and then make a ruling. Generally, what they would be appealing on is, you said that my weeds were 16 inches tall, and they're not, they're 15, and so we're gonna fight about who's right, were they 15 or 16 inches? Or, this isn't junk, these are my very special possessions, and they deserve to be sitting in my front yard, all over my front yard. Those are kind of some of the things that they might appeal. Potentially, they could also appeal that the ordinance is illegally written, or that there's some defect in the ordinance, and so they could appeal from a constitutionality perspective or something like that. So there's kind of any variety of reasons that they might appeal, but it's important that we expedite the process. And then finally, if they don't appeal it, but they don't pay the citation, then we would just assess it. Typically, those would be assessed in October or November when we're looking at the property taxes for the following year. So for the appeal hearing, as I mentioned, that ALJ, if the decision is upheld, in all of the instances where, in other cities where we've had these go to an ALJ, we have been successful because we really don't use these unless we're certain that they're in violation of the code. They uphold, the violator has to pay the fee, plus they have to pay up to $1,000 towards hearing costs. Most of these hearings cost more than $1,000, which means that they're paying $1,000. The city is responsible for paying the remainder of the amount, so that is important to know. If the penalty isn't paid, we can assess, and of course, if they don't appear, it's a default judgment for the city, but they actually have to pay a couple $100 to the ALJ's office, the Office of Administrative Hearings, to even get a hearing, so they're probably gonna show up. If a decision is overturned, so let's say that we fight about the height of the weeds and the judge decides, no, they were only 15 inches, you didn't have a right to assess that administrative citation, they find no violation, we have to refund that filing fee that they paid to the ALJ, which I believe is $270. And then we have to pay for all the costs of the hearing. And then if this was an abatement, so if we did something, we took their stuff, we have to give back their stuff. And that will make sense when we talk about abatement, which is now. Okay, so abatement is the removable nuisances. This is where you've got the junk in the yard, or you've got, the weeds that we can mow. Really, this is like we're the maid service, and we have seen this in other cities where abatement does sort of become we're the maid. The nice thing about this is generally you can get your money back because all of your costs you're able to assess against the property, but it does take a while. So as I mentioned, the removable nuisances, it's trash, grass, unsecured storage, trees, junk vehicles, those types of things. So in the abatement process, what happens is we see that they have a junk vehicle in their front yard, and we send a notice to them that says, you have 30 days to get that junk vehicle out of your yard. We go back and inspect in 30 days, the junk vehicle is still there, so then we send a notice that says, we're going to remove your junk vehicle. We go, and on what date? We're going to remove your junk vehicle within 10 days or whatever. We remove the vehicle. In that case, because it may have some residual value as a junk vehicle for scrap or something, we would probably need to hold it for 60 days before we could actually get rid of it as abandoned property. So we'll talk about that in a second. But we would remove the vehicle, and then we would send an invoice to the property owner. Here's how much it costs to have the guy come tow the junk vehicle out of your yard. If they don't pay that, we assess it to the property. So similar to an administrative citation, there are certain things that need to be in your abatement. Notice must contain the address, the description of the violation, the compliance deadline, and what we're going to do. There's a limitation to abatement. Abatement is only if they let us. So what I mean by that is we can only abate things that are what are considered in the curtilage of the property or basically visible from the public right-of-way. I can't abate something in somebody's backyard. I can't abate something behind a fence. Even if it's a chain link, doesn't matter. If it's behind a fence, I can't abate it. But I can abate things in the front yard, and I can abate things in areas that I can see or that don't have a fence. I also cannot abate something if they say, get off my property. Conversely, I could abate the entire yard, including the backyard or even in a building, if I get the property owner's permission. We've seen this happen where typically it's been in a divorce situation where the person who's on the title isn't the person living there anymore, and it's some other, disgruntled spouse that's living there, and so then the property owner says, sure, you can abate, I don't care, and so then you go and you abate. So that, just to be clear, you can do it with property owner permission. And then, of course, $40,000 of assessments on the property later, they kind of regretted giving city permission. So abatement, you're generally going to hire a company to remove stuff, right? If it's stuff, so if it's not garbage, we have to store it for at least 60 days in a secured location. That means we're either renting some sort of a storage unit or we're asking Dave really, really nicely if he has some space in Public Works. Yeah. So we're renting a storage unit. And if it's garbage, if it's clearly trash, we throw it away. Obviously, we need to be documenting, right? So we're taking a lot of photographs along the way, and there's some communication. I mean, you can see where this code enforcement officer becomes a full-time job pretty quick. And then after 60 days, we can dispose of anything that's not garbage. So this is just an example of how effective abatement can be, because I know a lot of these things that we're talking about today, this should have been my caveat at the very beginning, it's frustrating. Code enforcement, public nuisance, and managing public nuisances is so frustrating for cities. There's tools, they work, but they cost a lot of money, or they're incredibly time consuming, or both. And sometimes if you have a real problem property, it takes a long time to get something to be effective. So I want to show you a before and after because this is impressive. So this is the before, a weed abatement. This is a front yard of a house. And this is after the city came in and cleaned it up. It makes a pretty significant difference. When you have, obviously I would not recommend this for somebody who just has 16 inches of grass. Maybe that's not rising to the level of abating, but when you have somebody who has clearly not maintained their lawn in years, okay, now we're probably cost-benefit analysis looks different. Okay, a civil action and an injunction. So let's say that we've done some compliance letters, we've sent some administrative citations, still haven't gotten compliance. Maybe we even abated, we did some garbage pickup, and we still just are not getting anywhere. We have this option of a civil, of an injunction. This is the court procedure for a public nuisance that is about behavior of a person. So these are going to be your prostitution houses, these are going to be your drug houses, these are going to be your just kind of constant crime going on at the property, not really so much about the structure or maintenance. It's really behavior. And typically we need to have a couple acts of a public nuisance, and in a situation like this, we would be working with the police department so that we could all be on the same page in terms of what tool we're using, so we can have some documentation around various nuisance behaviors. And then the occupant has an opportunity to create an abatement plan with us. So basically, you're going to stop doing the drug stuff at your house, and we won't be, there'll be no more of that behavior. A court will give them a temporary injunction, which basically means it tells them you have to stop doing the nuisance behavior. In this case, let's say it's the drug behavior, for 30 days or 60 days or whatever. If they violate during that temporary injunction, so if they act as a public nuisance again, and actually in that case it can be any public nuisance. If they're a public nuisance, then they would get a permanent injunction. And a permanent injunction from the court, or we can get a permanent injunction from the court, is the court saying everybody out of that property for 1 year. It has to be completely vacated. This is a powerful tool. We've used it in some other cities. It was for a party house that was just out of control, drug activity, trafficking, all kinds of bad behaviors. And ultimately, it was shut down for a whole year, and nobody was allowed to live in it for a whole year. This process is expensive, it's time consuming, and this really affects people, right? If you're shutting down a house that people are living in for a whole year, this is a serious problem property. This isn't to be used lightly. And I'm not suggesting that we would, but just so we understand this is appropriate for serious situations. Okay, sort of the sister civil action to that one is the hazardous building. And that's we commonly call that a 463 action. And that's basically the same thing as the previous action that we just talked about, except for instead of talking about humans' behavior, we're talking about the structure. So now there's something wrong with the structure. It's been partially burned. It's turned into just, it's a hoarding house that has a varmint problem, and something about it is not safe. We need to have our building official officially declare the building hazardous in order to do this. Once they do, we file the 463 action. Council would issue an order saying you have to fix all of these hazards and become non-hazardous. Generally at that point, in 463 actions, we do see a lot of mental health stuff. So either they're not capable of doing it, or we've kind of lost whomever was sort of managing that property, and maybe it's grandson or somebody else is living in the property at that time or something like that. So generally they don't correct those hazards. And then assuming they don't, then the court can point to the city and say, okay, you can do whatever you need to do, including demoing the building. So anything, and up to demoing the building. We don't actually get ownership of the property, so the property ownership stays with that property owner, but obviously nobody can live there, and potentially, depending upon what the hazard is, again, like a semi-burnt building or something, we can raise the building. Again, like the previous one, this process is expensive, it's time consuming, and obviously it's very serious. We could be potentially demoing somebody's home. Like both of these, for this 463 action, if we were to go down that route, we are able to assess our costs against the property.
Direct costs and indirect, like cost of staff time, is that?
So Sort of staff time, certainly my time, so any legal time, any third parties. My advice to you, very much on the record, would be we're going to farm out as much as possible of this work because then that is clearly delineated. But yes, I would say some of the administrative might be tricky to quantify, but some staff time, yes. Okay, I think this is our last tool. Criminal citations. So this is where a police officer issues a citation for violating the city code. Any violation of city code is considered a misdemeanor unless it's otherwise stated in the code that this is a petty or something like that. So we can use these. We have used these in the city. They're an option if we can't debate if administrative citations aren't an option, if they ignore them, or if the police department's already handling the matter. I think a good example would be the difference between junk vehicles and a chop shop. So a chop shop, that would make sense to have that be in the criminal citation world. Junk vehicles, that makes sense to have that be in the administrative citation world. Okay. Limitations and costs. So code enforcement is expensive. Some of the examples that I gave here today about the, like a 463 action where we're going to raise a building, or an injunction where we're going to be having to shut down a property for a year. I mean, those are $30,000, $40,000 to do easily. You can recover some of those costs, but it's slow, and it also takes potentially years to get from sort of when you have the beginnings of your problem property to when your problem property is no longer a problem. That's sort of the frustrating nature of code enforcement. But that doesn't mean just because it's hard to do that it's not important to do. That it's a necessary component of managing a city, and as the city gets bigger, it's going to be an even more important area. Okay, so that concludes I guess it was a monologue, sorry. So that concludes that. What staff is looking for from you is, first things first, where is the appetite for adding administrative citations as a tool? Can we add those to the city code? And if so, we would come back with an ordinance that's obviously fully baked. And I would say probably we limit those to public nuisances only. So it's not, the administrative citation is not for any violation of code. It's just for code violations that rise to the level of a public nuisance for now. If we love these things and they're amazing and a couple years from now we want to beef them up, we can certainly do that too. So that's the first question. The second one is policy. What are the council's perspectives on creating a policy around enforcement? This is helpful for justifying why we're doing what we're doing. It's helpful for staff to know how to prioritize, and then it's helpful if and when we ever get into court litigation or anything, and we can show this is our process, or this is why we're doing these things. As I think I mentioned in the memo, and we've talked about this before, generally, most cities do complaint-based, right? So your ones that are the squeakiest wheels are the ones that are going to rise to the top, and those are the ones that are going to be dealt with. And then within that, though, are there certain types of violations that the council would like to focus on? And then finally, budget. Everything that we talked about tonight costs money, and so what is the council's appetite to spend money? For the rest of this.
We start with, maybe just general, maybe before we dive into the specific questions, we just start with general questions. I don't know if anyone has any. See, read through the packet, heard Amanda's presentation, any specific kind of questions?
I guess one would be, being relatively new here, how many complaints in a given year would you say that the city receives on something of nuisance type of complaints?
Off the top of my head on nuisance, minimum about 250, maybe even more, maybe double. Quite a bit,
250 calls a year?
probably, if
Okay.
not more.
Okay.
I can comment on that because Corey and myself, and I'm not sure who else receives the emails that come in for code enforcement. And I get emails daily. I don't know that they're all code enforcement issues. Corey determines that, but I get emails on a daily basis through that code enforcement online inquiry.
Yeah, and to the point, we've been trying to handle it in different ways and, kind of shoving it into building a little bit because more of the enforcement people are out in the street, but I get calls, Abby gets calls, everybody gets calls. So we've never actually tracked the number of calls, but 250 is probably on the low side. I mean, they're daily. And sometimes they're neighbor to neighbor, sometimes it just depends.
I'm sure that there's some that are just petty also.
Oh,
You
yeah, of
probably get
course.
some of that too.
Yeah.
So right now, are we sending those folks letters when we do get a complaint or somebody stops by?
Depending on the complaint,
Yeah.
we will investigate that. Corey will go out and look at it, and if it's a complaint that's justified or rational,
Valid,
we
right.
will, valid, thank you. We will send a letter out, yeah. Mhm.
So we're kind of doing some of this already.
We're doing some of it, but
Yeah.
it's taking away from our other function. I mean, it's taking away from the building function, obviously, and the things that we need to do there. So it takes a lot of time to send those letters out. And let's just take, we have sidewalk issues, snow shoveling issues. Well, you can imagine how many complaints we get on just that. Whether it's downtown, whether it's my neighborhood, whether it's Broadway, whether it's by Target. I mean, those are probably, after every snowstorm, you probably get 50 of them, So we are doing it. It's very reactive. Again, as Amanda stated, we're not going to start all of a sudden go out and searching for these things. We're not going to have a patrol going up and down every street looking for those, because we will have plenty of business once we get this, if we get this into place, to keep us busy. I mean, maybe an inspector will be driving by a house and see something casually, but we're not going to have an actively patrolled city that's looking for these kind of violations.
I would assume this would go toward either individuals or businesses or whatever.
Yeah,
If-
I mean, mostly it'll be individuals probably, but there'll be business issues that are out, that they do crazy things as well.
Well, there's plenty of businesses in town that leave the weeds grow this tall and
Yeah.
right in the crack of the
Yeah,
sidewalk.
or they leave their trucks,
Yeah.
their old trucks, they don't get rid of them, and, there's plenty.
I think I've voiced my concerns before on a code enforcement officer. I don't want Barney Fife walking through people's backyards, and that's my issue here. And do we need a code enforcement of some sort? I believe we do. I really do.
The
I just
secret
don't want
there
it to
is,
get out of hand.
yeah, the secret there is to manage it correctly, hire the right person, and then train that person. I think we are at the point, as Amanda stated, that we probably do need a full-time, if we go down this, it's a full-time position, just to track all this, to write the citations, and then we've got to get finance involved, so. And we get enough calls that it's probably time to do it.
There's a good example right here in town, just a couple blocks away, where the house did burn, and it's been standing there ever since.
Yeah,
And that's been months.
while that's a little different, because sometimes when houses burn, they get boarded up, they're waiting for insurance, and insurance can, but somebody can at least inquire into that kind of situation and
Find
find
out
out
what's
what the
going on.
status is, and if it's a status where it's been, longer than it should be, and there is no insurance and everything, then we can start to take whatever action, probably closer to some of those 463 actions that Amanda talked about, though.
One quick point is, the code enforcement officer doesn't get to walk in the backyards either. This is, the same rules apply for abatement or just being on the property. We get to be in the curtilage, we can walk up to somebody's front door. We call it the Girl Scout rule. I get to go where the Girl Scouts go. And so if the Girl Scout isn't gonna go there, she's never gonna be in your backyard, then I don't get to go there as the code enforcement
Well,
officer.
You heard my,
Yeah.
my
Right,
concern.
I just want to
And-
make it clear, we don't get to do
Yeah.
that, even if we wanted to.
And I do like the idea where there's an appeal process too.
Yes.
Now, do we have some issues in the city of Forest Lake? We certainly do. Some real issues that need to be taken care of. But on the other hand, just in case somebody was being petty, I think those folks should have an opportunity to defend themselves in a case like that. So, we just want to make sure that we're working for all the people in this city.
Well, and that's why the second question maybe should be the first question around policy, because it's harder to be petty when we have a clear policy of prioritizing the most important code enforcement violations that we want to focus on. What I'm hearing and what I've heard in previous meetings, it sounds like it's kind of the excessive junk and, the weeds and that kind of thing. That's not unique, right? That's really every city. And then down from there.
I would say even on top of, I think getting the agreement of that triage will be important, and then it's kind of a resource thing of, how staff is spending their time. It kind of depends on what else is on the list, and if we all have agreement on how that's going to be triaged, that could be a very effective program, and also kind of self-limiting, or it kind of governs itself on, if there's a lot of little petty things, okay, that's fine, they can be on the list and they're part of the process, but if we are spending time on 3 homes that have burned and haven't been adequately mitigated, then that's probably worthy, or whatever that higher priority item, and it just kind of becomes self-governing based on that. I do think that there is some level of like minimum, acknowledgement of a complaint, and at least sometimes if you just let people know, hey, this doesn't meet our expectations, there are those that will say, like,
They didn't even realize it.
if you give it,
Yeah.
they maybe didn't realize, or it's just oh gosh, I actually got a letter in the mail, it's telling me that my whatever. I think that is helpful and can prompt some good action, but I think then we have to work on making sure staff's time is spent on, so maybe not just the squeaky wheel, but also the things that we've said in the triage policy, these are more important.
Well, and that's the important part of the process is that we send them a notification to begin with. Say, hey, we've noticed somebody's complaining, whatever the case may be. You have junk, you have weeds, you didn't shovel your snow. It's important to get that first step, because a lot of people will just comply and say, oh, I was out of town for a week, I didn't get to shovel my snow. I'm back now.
I agree. I think 90% of it would go that way.
It has to be almost a mandatory, it does have to be a notice that says, oh, by the way, we have this problem with you. We'll give you so many days to fix it.
Mayor Bain and Administrator Casey doesn't even know this. Just in the last week, we've actually drafted just a courtesy letter. So some of these complaints, especially just the lawn mowing complaints, we don't have the resources to be sending out on every single complaint. Lawn grass and weeds, if it's a first time, we're just sending a courtesy notice. Hey, you might not have known, but our code says you need to keep your grass cut. That's just one way that we're trying to be more proactive. And a means to at least start enforcement procedures, but not necessarily as heavy-handed as I think some people think that code enforcement can be. So.
What is the starting wage for a code enforcement for a city our size? Any idea?
I would think it would be similar to a building inspector 1 or 2, and what is that, 50? Something like, I believe 50 to 55 probably, just without looking. Yeah, I would say something like that.
And then any of the fines or does that get put back towards that person's?
It would, well, in a roundabout way, yes, because it would be deposited into the general fund as a revenue. We listed as a revenue item, and it would balance off. One of the issues with that is trying to figure out if we have to put it on a tax roll, how that gets worked, but it still will come back to the general fund, so.
Also, I do think that there may be certain nuisances, whether that's weeds, junk removal, snow removal, that we may just categorize of have a service, that's what they do, and we have a separate, maybe fast-tracked program for that, that doesn't necessarily take up the same amount of staff time and resources as the one-offs. I think that I think identifying some of those key areas, and I think council to give those priorities, I think would be helpful, that it's just not, we, send 2 letters and then we're calling the snow removal person or the yard service or whoever it is.
Yeah, that's absolutely on target. We don't want to be shoveling snow from somebody's house. A service can do that. Public Works is small enough that we just don't want that.
We should
Cutting
pause-
grass.
We should pause though, I'm gonna interrupt you. We should pause though, because that is a pretty significant shift in policy, and is that, as council, is that a path we want to go down? And I think, I'm just open to feedback on that, because again,
And
we
we
haven't.
have cut grass before in this community, but again, it's a service that does it. It's not, you really don't want to, I don't even know if we got machines small enough to do that, because we do big parks, but it really is more call up a service, have them cut the grass, shovel the snow, tow the car away, things like that.
And have we, what is our experience level with either of those, or any of those things?
I know that we have in the past cut grass. Can't tell you how much we've done it, but that's been a service that we have somebody do. We haven't done much snow that I recall. I don't know, but that would be a service. And depending on what else is out there, if it's all cars, we don't have a tow truck, so we'd have somebody tow it. And obviously, if it's any value, we have to store it somewhere. So we'd have that done. So there's a lot of,
Is that all stuff that we put out for public bid then for different companies to?
we'd get quotes at least. I don't know about a bid, but we'd ask for different vendors to give us a price on what's it cost to cut, a yard.
I also think there's some risk management.
And sometimes also with this type of situation, whether it's tows, you have a list of vendors and you just start at the top, and if he can't do it, then you go to the next one, or if they did it, then you go to the next one for the next time. So you list the qualified vendors and you just call down the list.
I do think there's some good risk management reasons also on why we don't
Oh.
want city staff doing these
Absolutely.
things, right?
Absolutely.
These are our employees, it's our work comp
Absolutely.
policy. There's a lot of reasons why we want that arm's
Risk
length
management,
transaction.
workers' comp issues.
Oh, it'd be a nightmare.
There's a whole, because if you're cutting somebody's grass, you never know if it's 16, 17, 20 inches tall, you don't really know what's under there. So,
I can see another defense too. I don't mow my grass during the month of May. You're
Correct.
gonna hear some of that too, I think. So where do we go with that,
Those are the things, I mean, as Amanda said, and I've done this before as well, property maintenance is the most difficult
I-
thing
I-
to do,
my-
because there's so many different
Yeah.
things to look at, and judgments, and
My thing is garbage and clutter in the backyard and that kind
Yeah.
of thing. That's just my,
there's plenty of that.
Yeah. I think we need something, really do.
In that appeals process, who is representing the city? Does a code enforcement officer need to be there? Is that you or somebody from your team, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so for an appeal, that would be me. And then eventually, depending upon how experienced of a code enforcement officer you get, or how simple the citation is, we have a few cities that, unless it's, messy, I don't go. If it's just so obvious, if they don't have an attorney, if they get an attorney, yeah, I'm gonna need to be there. So it's a little bit case by case for that.
Yeah, it's been my experience a lot of times when those happen, it is just the administrative law judge, the inspector, and the person who got the citation. And usually the administrative law judges are pretty good to walk them through either the testimony from the city or the testimony from the person who had the citation.
It's a pretty informal
Yeah.
room. It's not, it doesn't feel like a courtroom. It's this is a far more formal setting than what that room will be in with the ALJ. So that's helpful for like the property owner to feel comfortable.
Are they here in Washington County?
They are not. It is down in St. Paul at the Office of Administrative Hearings by the
Is
Capitol.
that a state office?
Yeah.
Must be state office.
It is.
As far as overall cost, other cities that are similar in size that have this sort of process in place with a code enforcement officer, Well, they're collecting fees from, you know, things. What's the net cost? What should we expect to be the bottom line to the general fund?
I'm not sure we know it because we don't know what the extent of A, the fine structure is, and B, how many incidents we'll have, and then what the collection experience is going to be there. It depends on what you set the fine at, right?
I'm just kind of looking for a ballpark of other cities
I
of
would
similar
say
size.
at the first year, you probably can recoup 25 to 50% of what the cost is. And then, I mean, if it's a 50,000 plus benefits, they're 50,000 plus 35% on top of that. You may be able to get up to 50%, but again, it's the first year. We've got a long way to go here.
Yeah, but overall, wouldn't the budget be much bigger than just the code enforcement officer's salary and benefits?
It'll be salary and benefits and be part of probably the ASME union. So there's some uniform stuff. We probably have a car already, so we probably won't need an extra car or vehicle. And then just paper, mailing, things like that.
And then isn't it also though a cash flow impact, right? Like we front all of those costs. Yes,
Yes.
we recoup them, but
Yes.
any of the costs that we have on any of the service providers, the attorney, any of that is cash flowed by the city.
Correct, and just like everything else we do, we think about development, we have to track those costs and what we're spending in case we try to recoup some of those other costs, and depending on what kind of offense it is and what it is, citation it is, so.
So I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but for the two cities that I'm most familiar with, which are West St. Paul and South St. Paul, and you guys are 20,000,
Yeah.
about 20,000, yeah. So you're comparable to South St. Paul in size. Their rate of return on their administrative citations, so citations that they send out and then they get paid, and then, I mean, if you're paying it, you're probably also fixing the problem, right? It's really good. It's like 96%.
That's a pretty good collection rate.
So that's pretty high. That was before COVID. All of those numbers were like 2018, 2000. So I don't know what it looks like today, and I don't know if their experience is going to be Forest Lake's experience, because this is new in those cities. Those programs have been there for, a very long time. So it's going to take some public education to help people understand that we're going to have some people who are mad, right? How dare you tell me that I have to pick up my non-junk junk? There's going to be some public education around that stuff too.
Yeah, and if you do issue a citation, I mean, then the 97% makes sense, because if they don't pay, it gets on the tax roll,
Correct.
right? It's really how much time is spent on those compliance letters, and what's the percentage of compliance before a citation, and we won't know that for a while yet. It'll take us a while, to get all the policies and the ordinance, and hopefully start in '24, but, and then, of course, the winter is usually a little slower. But then spring, summer, and fall will be busy, so. And winter then will come on with snow shoveling and things like that, so.
Was this role baked into the 10-year projection?
Yes.
I know we've talked about it, I just don't know where it falls in the 10-year projection. I can look at that, I'm not
It
sure.
has been on the proposed budget
It
for
has
the
been,
last
yeah.
maybe not final, it certainly wasn't final budget, but it's been part of budget discussions for at least 3
It
years.
has been.
Like it's been like it's been a bubble position for a number of years that we've, expressed, there's just general, maybe it's not the most customer experience friendly, experience to have a police officer show up at your door with a ticket. It's not necessarily how we want to use law enforcement. There's, recognition of it is a growing problem. So.
Yes, it has been part of the plan, but it was put pretty far out based on what we were doing at the time. But yeah, it is part of the plan. We just need to, I really think we need to accelerate it to '24 and get started. We get enough complaints, we get enough calls, we have enough issues to do something. We need to do something.
Well, the biggest problem with the complaints is that you need somebody to follow up on the complaint. I
And we do the best we can,
Yeah.
but, and right now, we really don't have a lot of recourse except for a criminal citation. And I've told the board, the council before, that once it gets to court, those really don't go anywhere. So, I mean, it's pretty much a waste of our time.
Well, hearing that there's hundreds of people in complaints and then hearing about other cities, I'm in favor for administrative citations, knowing that we'd send notices with dates and had hoped people would see that and then clean up whatever they need to clean up. But yeah, I'm favorable for administrative citations. And knowing that that would be an ordinance change, then obviously I'm in favor for policy.
I agree.
And I guess continuing on to number 3, I'd be in favor of a code enforcement officer as well. Knowing that that would take a lot of time from current staff, and I'd prefer, current staff I think is already overwhelmed with all the things that need to be done, so I'm favorable for a new position.
I'm seeing some heads nod. Any other different opinions or different flavors of that?
No, it's been an issue for a long time. You know, you've heard my
Yeah.
concerns, and as long as those are addressed, then we can do it in a
I
proper
think
way.
getting the right person hired for that position is, this is one where friendly approach, just, you know, maybe friendly's the wrong
No,
starting word, but it's that, like, focus on education. I mean,
Professionalism, all of it.
this topic is challenging because it's many times, there's a financial barrier, or there's a mental health barrier, or just a perspective of, you know, this
Yeah,
is
I mean,
property rights perspectives, there's just
Absolutely, you
lots
have
of
to
different.
respect the citizen, they're your customer, that should be the overall guide. We're not out there to be a punitive organization where we look for the littlest thing to write a citation over or to send a letter over, with things that make sense, things that are obvious, complaints that we get. That should be the philosophy, the management philosophy of this program. It has to be, or else, you know, what's gonna happen, you'll have 100 people in here telling you that this is a bad program, and you'll say, okay, guess what, we cut the program. And we don't want that, because then it's just, we return to, you know, to the same problems we're having now. I mean, it really is about style and substance and doing it the right way, and that's what the goal will be here. So if that's the case, we will begin to talk about the ordinances and developing those in a policy, and look and see how we can include that in the proposed budget on the upcoming, and then obviously, we're going to revisit this, the budget comes out when we publish that, and you'll see where that fits and what the cost is. And Amanda and I and Abby and whoever else is involved, the building department will start to work on code and citation, code and policy.
Is this only a complaint-based system, or are there properties that, or situations we're aware of because of either a accumulation of complaints or things that haven't, maybe in kind of cases that are in process that we have tried over the years? I can think of at least 5 off the top of my head that we just haven't hit any level of success with, or, and that maybe that's just the nature of the beast. Are there certain that are city initiated, and I would be interested in a process on something that might be city or council initiated? Because I think there are a handful of those that, if we're heading down this path, may make sense.
If there's a reference from the city council, that's a complaint.
Right.
That's a complaint.
Yeah.
However, yes, there are those properties out there that we've been chasing for, well, since I've been here, at least 5 years now. So we will continue to maybe use this tool on those. I mentioned earlier that if there is a inspector, or building, somebody, or police officer, somebody just happens to drive by and, I mean, they're not looking for it, but they get waved down, or they drive by somebody's front house and it's just, you know, just terrible, or it's burnt out, or whatever the case. I mean, they'll be internal, but 95 to 98% of these are gonna be by somebody calling us and telling us there's a problem. Maybe in a few years, when we get the whole place cleaned up, then we can start looking a little closer, but, no, you know, most of these will, and we will have plenty of complaints, about things. And
We have
know,
talked about a community cleanup day. It was part of the initial conversations with Republic, and we didn't have a great runway to make that actually executable, but maybe something we would maybe consider
no, I
revisiting.
think a cleanup day is great. I mean, and I think we've given you the example, we did have a problem property. We put the dumpsters on their property to
Yeah,
have them
that
clean
was
it up.
successful.
Yeah.
And damn, if they cleaned it up, yes, they cleaned it up, but now it's back worse than it was the first time, so.
I know the property you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, so we've tried that, but yeah, I think a community cleanup is,
It's-
absolutely,
Yeah,
that's always a good idea.
There's a lot of-
it's a habit.
Just a question into Mr. Gruntner's point about, you know, penalties and billing, and it sounds like there's a maximum state statute you can, but where can you start at? Is there a minimum that you,
There isn't a minimum. Other cities that do this, the lowest that I've seen is 50. The average is around 100 to 200. And all of the cities that I can think of right now, off the top of my head, double each time. So they double the citation amount. That is a motivator, the threatening to double your citation amount.
Okay.
I get that. I do think that there's a difference. So the other thing is, I do think it's important to think about South St. Paul, for example, differentiates between certain like business violations and individual property violation. Businesses are going to be paying more because the concept is they have a little bit more, and or they might be more motivated, you know, that they might need a little more to be motivated. If I'm using outside storage illegally for my business, well, that might just be a business expense. If I can, you know, if I'm just paying $200 a month, that's better than what I'd have to rent a spot for. So we have found that for businesses that they tend to start at a higher point for violations that would be specific to businesses than for residential property.
I can think of a couple instances where a piece of property is sitting there empty, but the people don't live here, they just own that piece of property. And the weeds get 4 feet tall and all that. So that seems to me to be a good tool to go that direction because of that. At least with some communication with sending a letter or whatever the case may be.
I think, again, that has to be part of the process. We have to give them that notice.
Yeah, because in that case, you're not walking up to a door and knocking on the door, you know, so.
I mean, there are some programs where you actually tag the building with on-door sticker of some kind or a door hanger. That's another option as far as notification goes. Mail's usually more common, but I've seen ones where it's a door hanger or it's a nice blue, purple, red neon kind of sticker that says, oh, by the way, cut your grass. So, those are hard to miss, though.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly in support of the administrative citations. I think about a month ago, we gave you abatement, or like, we passed an abatement policy, right? I guess my only concern is around the budget, and we've already had a lot of, you know, hard conversations around parks and roads, and so, you know, does it, if we get through number 2 and we don't get to number 3 this year, is it worth the journey?
Yes.
It's not. I mean, yes, we'll have more tools, but we won't have anybody, we'll have very little tools to do it.
Patrick does have a point. I think we need more tools. I just did a quick look. In zoning's enforcement files, we have 75 open cases. Those are lots of junk, lots of weeds. I mean, some of them are weeds, right? We had winter, they went away. Being able to issue a citation to maybe gain that compliance is a helpful tool, but we're gonna have those big ones and they're gonna sit out there. We're not gonna be able to work on them any bit more than we do right now.
And I think the best way to look at this is not to make that decision now. Let's,
Yeah.
I mean, we can start working on the policy and the code. And, you know, in a few, 2 short months, it's just almost July now, sometime in August, you'll see the numbers and see what it looks like. And then you can have that discussion, and you should have that discussion then.
I think that's the hard part about any budget discussions right now, is it's all in context of everything else that's on the table, and so it's a little hard to see how that's, I think we're all, personally, I'm interested in seeing how all of that fits together, and what is the total number, and then if, you know, depending on appetite for that total number, then how do those pieces fit together? And we have a lot of potentially multi-year projects kind of getting stacked together, and so it's kind of the Rubik's Cube on what sticks and what isn't able to stick, and it's hard to, other than maybe expressing some appetite to consider for budget, it's hard to get beyond that until we're back to looking at the full plan again, in my opinion.
And I think if we are gonna do an ordinance and policy, those both cost money, lots of money. And we're gonna have to come back to council with more feedback. So if we're already spending the money for an ordinance and a policy, my opinion, we might as well make it worth our while and actually make it useful.
So,
Councilmember
I mean,
Roberts.
I'm all about aesthetics. I talk about weeds at the city, the issues the city has, and I think that, if you've ever lived next to one of these properties and you take care of your yard, it's frustrating, and this is value added, I think, for the residents, and I think they'd appreciate the fact that the city is taking this as a lead and doing something about it. So, I know it has a budget, implication, but I think most of the public's gonna be favorable to it and appreciate it.
I assume there'd be a public hearing on this too, right? I mean, no?
Well, there'll be, it's not particularly a public hearing, but you'll have an ordinance to consider and public comment if
Yeah.
people want to come and comment. But I don't think an official public hearing is necessary, but, I'm sure Hannah will help us get this out.
She's gotta get the
She'll be
word out,
calling me
right?
tomorrow.
Get the word out, yeah. No, I agree. It's something that needs to be done. It's gotten out of hand, so.
It's very, very typical of communities at this size that this is gonna be, this is not unusual.
Do you feel like you have as much feedback as we're able to give right now? Or kind of hit the primary points? Excellent. Council, any other points of feedback on this topic? All right, we are at our end of our planned agenda, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Go ahead.
Can I just ask a question, maybe what the plan is for a replacement for Dan's position and also airport?
Still go, we are going through that now, and we will be going through that. Probably that will be reflected in the budget presentation as well. We're evaluating whether we need to retain that position as it is or modify it a bit. So we're looking at it, just don't know yet. I don't have an answer for you yet.
Will there be an interim position to take his roles?
No, there will be no interim. We will just absorb duties as we can in different places.
Your thought is, though, maybe you don't have do you have a plan as to timing of, I guess my concern when I hear that is I don't want us to be in a holding position until the end of the year, for example,
Oh,
right?
no.
Okay.
It's, anytime you have a vacancy, you need to look at it, and you need to see what is good about it, what's bad about it. Can you change it? Can it be different? That's what we need to take the opportunity to do. I'm anticipating that we'll have a decision, and if it changes, or if it doesn't change, it'll be reflected when we present the budget in August, this is what I'm hoping.
And are you
And
comfortable?
then asking at that time, if it doesn't change, we will go out and try to hire somebody at that time. If it changes or is modified some way, we will tell the council what we're thinking and then probably ask to go out for that, if it's a new position or a different position, to fill that as fast as we can as well. We have internal discussions on what we really need. And like I said, that's important when you have a vacancy to always take a look at it and see what you need, and if it's still the proper thing. I mean, yes, airport's one, Dan did a lot of the technology stuff, where does that go? So there's a few issues we need to look at there.
All right, that being the end of our planned agenda, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose, and we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. See you on Monday.